Welcome to the Sports Ethicist Show, coming to you from the basement of Burpee on the campus of Rockford University in Sportstown, USA, Rockford, Illinois. I am Shawn Klein, the Sports Ethicist. The Sports Ethicist Show discusses the many ethical and philosophical issues that arise in and around sport. You can read the Sports Ethicist blog at sportsethicist.com, where you can also download podcasts of previous shows, subscribe to the podcast, or find links to related information. The Sports Ethicist is also on Facebook and Twitter, and you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. Well, the Winter Olympics start in a few weeks. Now, I love the Olympics, both the summer and winter games. They offer excitement and inspiration. I learn about new sports that I'd never heard of and see athletes perform feats that I never dreamed possible. But the Olympics always seem to come with controversy. The Sochi Olympics are no different. There are many controversies surrounding these winter games: security concerns, preparation worries, is it going to be enough snow, cost overruns. But one of the biggest controversies is the increasing discrimination and legal persecution of gays and lesbians in Russia. Now, in the run-up to the games, Russia has signed into law many restrictions against homosexuals and homosexuality, including prohibitions on abortion and even on appearing pro-gay. And these has prompted a call for some kind of boycott of the Olympics. To discuss these issues, I've invited Carley on to the show. Craig and I were graduate students together at Arizona State University several years ago, I guess almost a decade now. He is now, and has been since 2003, a faculty member in the Department of Liberal Arts at Phoenix College in Arizona, where he has taught over 80 courses in philosophy, including philosophy of sport, a course he created at Phoenix College. He's originally from Michigan and a die-hard fan of Michigan teams. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Thank you, Shawn. It's good to be here.
All right. So our topic is the Olympics, and so are you a big fan of the Olympics? You get excited about it?
I have watched them since my youth. Summer and winter games, both.
Do you have a preference for the summer or the winter, or is it kind of equal? Just kind of whichever's on.
I like the hockey and downhill events in the winter games, and track in the summer.
Yeah. What about swimming? Do you get into the swimming in the summer?
Yeah, I watch swimming. Swimming wasn't one of my main focuses while watching it, but yes, swimming's always fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I like a lot of the Summer Olympic sports, and of course that's some of the more classic, I guess, or traditional Olympics. They didn't have downhill skiing in ancient Greece, but but yeah, and so what is, and then the Olympic sports I get a kick out of a lot of the downhill, the alpine stuff. The ski jumping is pretty amazing, and then all the different sleds, the luge and the skeleton, those are pretty crazy. But the ice hockey does seem to be the highlight of the Winter Olympics for me, and I think a lot of Winter Olympic fans. What do you like about the Olympics? Is it just more sport to consume, or is there something special about the Olympics for you?
I think it's a tradition, just like the World Cup in soccer and the Super Bowl in the NFL. It's good to see these countries compete. Mm-hmm. It does sort of bring our country together.
Yeah, and that's one of the other issues if you start talking about the Olympics. Not something that I think we'll really get into, but the way the nationalism, I guess, both good, in a good way and a bad way of the Olympics. People get excited about their country's teams, USA, woo, go USA. But then there's a concern on some that goes too far and becomes more of like a jingoistic type thing where we look down on other countries or something like that. And so I know that some people are critical of the Olympics because of that. But I tend not to be. I kind of like having it's our country, and it's just fun to compete against other countries, and as long as it doesn't get nasty, then it's a lot of fun. Just like Detroit competing with Chicago or Boston competing with New York. I don't think there's any jingoistic elements there. So I think when we compete against Australia in the Summer Olympics for the swimming, that doesn't seem to bring out any bad nationalistic tendencies. Yeah, I like the tradition of it all as well. The pomp and the circumstance of the opening ceremonies is always pretty interesting. Do you watch the opening ceremonies?
Yes, I do. I don't sit glued to the TV like I do during the hockey games, but it is interesting, and the tradition of dipping flags and not dipping flags, and there is a strong sense of nationalism, I think, and almost imperialism in some regards.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Well, one thing nice about Olympic hockey is I'll be cheering for people I never cheer for. The U.S. team is made up of a bunch of players from teams I don't really root for during the season.
Right. Yeah, that's always a little weird. Like, I'm used to rooting against this guy. Same with like, the summer basketball and then the World Baseball Classic, which isn't quite as big as the Olympics or the World Cup, but rooting for the U.S. baseball team and rooting for guys like Jeter is weird for me. So, I mean, that's in some ways that's the nice part of the nationalism, is that it, like you said, it brings the country together, gives us something all to be on the same page about, to root for, to talk about, and everybody around you is typically rooting for the same team. And so it's like, instead of just that experience of, you're from Detroit, and so or not from Detroit, but from Michigan. Are you from Detroit, or are you from Michigan, or outside?
Most of my family lives in the Detroit area, but the other half of the family lives in Grand Rapids.
Okay. So. I know you're Detroit Lions and all that, fan of them, and the Red Wings. So, but there's kind of a closeness of people who are from Detroit, and same with Boston, and I think when you get to the international competitions, then that closeness just extended to the country, and so it's a nice feeling. But it can certainly go too far and become imperialistic, or be used more for propaganda purposes rather than just a more natural outgrowth of affection for the same team.
Right.
And then there's sometimes it's a borderline between celebrating the culture and the country and a kind of imperialistic propaganda type celebration on the other hand. So I mean, you could have something like the Vancouver Olympics. We had a lot in Canada about the First Peoples and some really interesting things about Canada and their culture, and that was pretty interesting. But then, and I think just more of a celebratory thing. But then if you look at the kind of stuff that in 1936 in Berlin, I mean, that I'm going to the other extreme. That becomes much more of a propaganda experiment rather than just let's celebrate our culture and history. I thought London was good. Their opening, thought that was pretty creative too, the way they integrated a lot about the history of England and so on. So
Seoul and Beijing, both were pretty entertaining Olympics.
Mm-hmm. Well, it definitely gives, in the American audience, because that's the perspective that I'm going to have, an intro, particularly into cultures that we're not that familiar with, into their history, into what their aesthetics, and their view of themselves and their view of the world, in a way that you're not necessarily going to get otherwise. And it may not be representative of everything in that culture, but it is at least a window into what China's like when we look at the Beijing Olympics and the kinds of dancing and the opening ceremony stuff that they did. That a lot of the dancing and choreography that they did was striking, and I think in a good way, just to open our minds to a different cultural celebration. But yeah, it did. But then you don't want it to go too far and become a propaganda piece, which is this discussion isn't quite what we sit down to talk about today, but I think it has some connection to the question of boycotts, and so that's sort of our opening theme for today's show is should the U.S. team be considering a boycott of the Sochi Olympics, given the particularly the discrimination and persecution of gays and lesbians in Russia. So what are some of your thoughts on the boycott question?
Well, Well, it would be a tragedy, I think, for our athletes if we would simply refuse to go and participate. So that would be an argument against boycotting, but there's a lot of ways we can protest without not attending the Olympics.
Okay.
I think President Obama, by sending Billie Jean King as a representative, is a subtle way of saying we object to what's going on in Russia.
I don't know if it's subtle, but I think it's I think that the delegation being sent, and it's Billie Jean King, but then several other gay athletes as well, right? On that delegation, which is it's not subtle, but I think it's a nice way to protest and to show that, look, we're coming, but we don't sanction these or support these regulations, and we're gonna really kind of make that point known. And I think that's an important thing to do when you're in a situation where you don't agree with whether it's the country's laws or your own institutions' set of principles or something like that, like where you're not necessarily in a position to do anything about it, and your withdrawal isn't going to be very effective in any case. Then sort of standing up and saying, look, I'm here, but I don't go along with all of this, I think can often be just as powerful a statement, if not a more powerful statement than a boycott. What other kinds of things do you think could be done beyond the delegation and then the president himself not going? Several of the Western power heads of states are not going to be in attendance for the Olympics. It seems like, at least, I mean, there may be other reasons, but it does seem like at least that's as a kind of silent protest against this. But are there things that athletes should do, or what do you think about that?
Well, I do think it's probably important for the athletes' safety not to flagrantly violate the propaganda law.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll just cause more tension. I think the matters will actually, after the Olympics, I think the situation in Russia will get worse. I heard that recently a bill was pulled regarding the adoption of children in same-sex homes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the law is going to be revisited after the Olympics, and what that law will do will effectively annul adoptions by same-sex parents. I think a writer for the New York Times living in Russia has a 12-year-old son, and if the law passes, she could lose her son.
Mm-hmm.
That just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, it's awful, and I think you're right. I think it will get worse after the Olympics, after you don't have international spotlight on them for that particular issue. That they're going to go and probably be even more forceful in their what am I trying to say, their pursuit of violators of the law. It seems like they're probably pretty soft in terms of looking for violators. Like they'll probably let a couple things go. I mean, I'm thinking if a couple of the ice hockey champions, guys who play in the NHL, and if they get the gold and they're up there and they have a little rainbow ribbon on them, it's hard to imagine that they're going to arrest, Lundqvist or Zdeno Chara or something like that,
right.
For that. And I mean, the NHL does seem to be one of the leagues that's in the forefront of inclusiveness for gays. They participate in something called the You Can Play project. Have you heard of that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so a lot of the players are involved in that. So I could see and then ice hockey is one of the, as we were saying, is one of the the main events for the Winter Olympics. And if you have the gold medal team or even all the medaling teams up there with on the medal platform, not making a big deal out of it, not raising a huge flag or anything, but just have a little ribbon or something like that, and big enough that it's obvious for the TV and that no one can really miss it. But it's not too flagrant or in your face, I think that would be a nice balance and a good fit of a kind of protest that couldn't just be ignored, but then also really couldn't be punished too much.
Right.
Now, I mean, if there's a Russian athlete that's up there, if Russia wins the gold, they probably wouldn't be doing that. But if the U.S. or the Canadian teams or the Swedish team, which have a lot of NHL players, guys who live and play in the U.S. and Canada, I could see them doing that. And I think that would be a good fit. I think that would be a powerful kind of protest and could be reminiscent of the '68 Black Power salute of Tommy Smith and John Carlos. That kind of statement, which caused a big stir, got those guys into trouble. But we're still talking about that 40 years later. So that's a pretty big impact. Do you think something like that? Do you think players will do that, or do you think that that's a little too far, a little too controversial for the Olympic athletes, and both in terms of just the media attention, right? Creating that kind of controversy, but then also, like you said, their safety, their personal safety. If they're going to get arrested by the Russian secret police, that's not. I wouldn't advise to do that if they really think that's a legitimate possibility. I would advise not getting arrested by the police.
Yeah, I think most of the athletes will leave it up to the coach. Perhaps present the idea, and then follow through with what the coach recommends. But not only the police, I'm worried about citizen violence.
Okay.
I don't think you'll see anything like what happened in Munich, but I do. When they're in the Olympic Village, I think they're going to need to take certain precautions.
Well, that's what I like about the ice hockey guys doing it, because no one's going to really start a fight. I mean, who's going to start a fight with Zdeno Chara? People don't even like to do that on the ice. They're not going to do that in person, probably. So, but numbers can matter, and so if you have 10 guys and one guy, then it doesn't matter how big and strong you are. 10 guys are going to take you out. So that's a concern, and I don't know what the situation on the ground would be like that, and would it be other athletes, or would it just be people, Russian citizens and so on, or would it be Russian citizens that are, get conspiratorial, who are sent in to cause trouble in that regard?
Yeah.
Then the police can come in and crack down because of that.
Putin plants.
Right, exactly. What?
I think it'll depend too on how the media is portraying the situation there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do you think? I was going to ask you that. How do you think NBC is in, and I guess particular Costas?
I think it's going to be a hot button. At least that's what we're going to see.
Mm-hmm. I don't think the Russians will see that.
Regardless, I mean, just for ratings' sake, I think they'll play it up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, and Bob, it fits into Bob Costa's, the way he does things. I mean, he likes those kinds of angles, or at least he seems to, and like for ratings purposes. But he also that seems to be his thing. He likes to call attention to those kinds of things. I know in the London Olympics, he made a pretty pointed statement about the Munich Olympics and their the anniversary of the Munich massacre in the Olympics, and the IOC refusing to do any kind of memorial in either the opening or the closing ceremonies, even though it was the 40th anniversary. And Costas made a big deal out of that, or made sure that he got that into the opening ceremony, at least on the NBC broadcast. So I imagine we'll see something like that too. Now, how often they come back to it might depend on what actually happens, and if athletes are making statements, if there's any kind of crackdown, any arrests, then I could see it becoming pretty big deal. But I think if it's pretty low key and the athletes aren't really doing anything or saying anything, and there aren't any state action on that front, then it probably will die down like most things.
Do you think if someone does vocally protest against the law, Russia will request the athlete be stripped of their medals?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm hardly an expert on that, but my gut is they wouldn't. I think if it's during the Olympics, I think that they probably would, depending on who it is. If it's like a lot of things. If it's a relatively unknown, they might try to get them kicked out, ask them to leave. Appeal to the IOC saying, hey, they're making a political statement, and that's, you guys don't. Other athletes have been asked to leave Olympics for making political statements. So I could see that happening. I mean, I think if it's a high profile athlete, that's probably less likely to happen. But I'd be shocked if they turn around and try to say that their medals should be denied. But then Smith and Carlos had their medals taken away, didn't they?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know what the procedure for that was. I just know that it happened.
Yeah. So maybe, thinking about it in that context, although I think it's a different time and era, and I think the IOC would be reluctant to do that because of the international pressure that they would then come under. I mean, they're already under enough scrutiny for their own corruption and their own issues with the Sochi Olympics, and they've come out pretty strongly against the Russian laws in their own way, I think. So they're saying, well, this is not part of Olympianism, and it's not part of our focus, but we can't take stands on local laws and so on. But they, as forcefully as I think they could, given their standing, came out against it. And so for them to pull someone's medals, depending on the statement, I mean, if someone, I think if they're just wearing ribbons, that seems to be a common thing that athletes do on the medal stand.
Right.
And so I'd be shocked if they did that. I mean, I think if someone did something much more outrageous or in your face, like if you have two guys kissing on the medal stand, I could see the IOC maybe stepping forward on that, because they would maybe regard that as going too far in their protest or something. But
right.
Just the ribbon seems to be something that's fairly common, people wearing human rights ribbons and things like that. And so I think if it's just a a rainbow ribbon or some other similar kind of symbol that one wears on their uniform during the medal ceremony, I don't think that would that'd be too far for the IOC. I think that they would live with that. And I don't think you'll see athletes get arrested, because I think that would cause just too much of a nightmare for the PR aspect for Russia, at least inside the Olympic Village. I mean, if people go out and are out and about, that might run into some trouble. But I mean, if they stay within the bounds of the Olympic Village and the area of the Olympics, I think they'll be okay. But they, I feel bad saying that in some ways, because we shouldn't have to say that. I mean, that's sort of like saying, again, kind of going back to the XXXII Olympics. Well, as long as the Jews stay in their Olympic Village and don't go out, they don't have anything to worry about the Nazis. I mean, that we shouldn't have to say that, and I think that raises an important question about how the IOC chooses its sites and how much of a regime's policies should come into play, and what kind of standards should be in place. I mean, do you think that should come into play at all? Should there be a consideration of a regime and its kinds of policies as part of the proposal process, or do you think that should be really kept by the wayside as much as possible, and to keep politics and the Olympics as separate as possible?
It's almost impossible to do.
Right.
I mean, we can't even keep college politics out of our philosophy of sport classrooms.
It's true. Well, and then, with the consideration of the regimes, I mean, what kind of policies? I mean, every country has policies that are going to be significantly objectionable to good portions of other ILC members. I mean, it's not as if the Western countries are perfect. There's lots of things that other countries would object about our regime, and so where's beyond the pale? It seems something like South Africa during the apartheid years certainly is beyond the pale, and that makes sense. But then what's in between?
Borderline case.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're pretty close to the border right now.
Mm-hmm.
A regime that wants to deprive a couple of their adopted children is I don't know. That seems like some statement needs to be made. Some sort of moral outrage should take place.
Mm-hmm.
Or selling children,
Okay.
looking the other way, or countries that look the other way regarding female genital mutilation,
Mm-hmm.
or there's a lot of trouble in the world, and we can't address them all.
Right. And we can't have the Olympics in London every year.
Right. That's true.
Although maybe that is a solution, is to find a spot that is more, for the Winter Olympics, maybe a spot that is more international. I mean, somewhere in Switzerland is, is quite international, at least in terms of the European nations. And then the Summer Olympics, find a spot that's more open and international, and or maybe you have one or two and you just rotate through. Why does it have to be in every different part of the? I guess it gives too much of an advantage to the European nations if it's always in Switzerland.
That's true. I like the idea, though.
Yeah,
it has possibilities.
Well, people have proposed that about the Super Bowl is why not just have you have it in Miami, you have it in Arizona, you have it maybe in LA. And maybe one or two other spots and just have it rotate through these 4 or 5 cities, New Orleans, that have a proven record of hosting Super Bowls and being warm weather cities, rather than this experiment with having in the Meadowlands, which is going to be a disaster. Unless the Patriots get to play a Southern team or a dome team, then that might be to their advantage. But something like that, I think would make more sense and be better for planning. But I think it would be harder to do for the Olympics. And then the IOC's not going to do it because they're not going to get their payment from Qatar if they can't, offer it to Qatar.
Yeah. Well, one of the benefits of hosting the Super Bowl or the Olympics is the local economic advantages.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just say, well, they're only going to be held in these places, then that hurts the other cities.
Yeah, although that does presuppose that the economic advantages really are there, and that's, I think that's an open question.
That is an open question. Yeah.
Now, I think one of the ways that go ahead.
Well, didn't that happen in the Chicago Olympics? It was going to be in St. Louis, but St. Louis couldn't afford to do it, and they had to move it to Chicago.
I wasn't aware of that. I remember. When we lost the bid, I had mixed feelings. Part of me was like, it would be an amazing, because I'm not too far from Chicago. I'd probably be able to see some Olympic events. That would, that's kind of a bucket list thing. But at the same time, I don't want that nightmare of the Olympics being here, and then Illinois and Chicago are bankrupt as it is, and so for them to make that kind of investment into the Olympics, I think would have been a mistake. I don't think, even if there is some economic gain, I don't think it's big enough to justify the kind of infrastructure investment that's needed. But if you have it in the same set of cities, some subset of cities, then you're not talking about brand new infrastructure every 4 years. It's just maintaining that infrastructure, adding a few things here and there, but you don't need to rebuild the stadium every 4 or 5 years for the Olympics. It's there.
Right.
And so the infrastructure would be there. And I mean, New Orleans has, they have the hotel rooms, they have the infrastructure for the Super Bowl. Same with Arizona. They have that stuff in place already. And so they're able to, I think, see some greater economic gain because there isn't as much infrastructure investment, capital investment that they need to put in. But a place like Sochi, for example, I mean, they basically like to build it up from scratch, and so I think that they're not going to see any real long-term economic gain. I think, but like, you know, that's a complicated question to try to calculate that out. But I think ultimately, I think the numbers bear against the claim that there's a big economic gain from building stadiums and things like that. There might be some short-term blimp, but doesn't seem like there's really long-term gain. A lot of just empty stadiums after a while.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like the city of Detroit.
Yeah, that's a whole other question. I'm sure you've seen things firsthand there, but also the pictures of the abandoned lots and abandoned buildings. I mean, it looks so sad the way it looks like, you know, there was a war, but it isn't. Just people left. But that's really a separate question, I guess. Coming back to the boycott question, I mean, I think we're in agreement that whatever the moral justification or moral impetus to do the boycott because of what Russia's done and the rights violations that they're involved in here, it does seem like a boycott would be ineffective, at least insofar as really harming the people that we'd want to harm. I mean, a boycott of the U.S. and several other Western nations isn't going to hurt Putin and the Russians. It probably actually would embolden them, but it would, as you said, harm all the athletes that wouldn't be able to go. But do you think there's a standard or a point at which the boycott that we ought to really be engaging in a boycott? I mean, like you said, this is a borderline case, so it's coming pretty close. But how far, what would push us over the line? So, for example, should the U.S. have boycotted the 36 Berlin Olympics with knowing what we now? Some of that's hindsight, knowing what we know now about the Nazis, but 1936 we knew enough about what was going on there that a boycott, and there were plenty of people calling for a boycott of the Berlin Olympics. But I mean, does something on that level call for a boycott? Do you think the 1980 boycott was justified because of Afghanistan in 1980?
Yeah, I do. And knowing what we do know now about the Nazi Olympics, I think we probably should have taken a pass at that. Mm-hmm. When all this came to light regarding Russia, there was talk about having the Olympics moved to Vancouver.
Yeah.
So maybe that would be a possibility in the future. Have a contingency plan.
Right. No, I like that. And that actually, if the boycott, or at least the threat of the boycott, was enough for the IOC to then move the Olympics. They've done that in the past. I mean, they did that in the post-war year periods, where it was supposed to be in Germany right after World War I, and they moved it away, and they didn't even invite the Axis powers to come to the Olympics. So there's precedent for moving it. I'm not sure if in the contemporary Olympics the logistics can really work out for that, but Vancouver just held it, so they're probably in a position to be able to do that. I don't know if Utah would be Salt Lake, given how long ago that was, but there's certainly places that could probably do it in a more or less rushed way, particularly if you brought in some private money to kind of rush things along. And that would certainly hurt Russia and Putin. But can you even imagine? Do you think the IOC would have the balls to do that?
No.
No.
No, they wouldn't.
No,
they wouldn't.
And I'm torn on the boycott question because I see the moral imperative here of what happens. So to Hitler and the Nazis in 36, to Putin today, I think it's a powerful message when you withdraw your sanction from them. Say, look, you're not a legitimate sovereign power because of the extent of your rights violations. And if you don't sanction them, it seems as if you're giving them a pass, and you're legitimizing them. You're giving these despotic, authoritarian regimes an equal seat at the international table. And while I think from a lot of Western perspective that doesn't seem like a big deal to us, I think from those nations, that's a big deal. When those kinds of despots get that kind of international recognition, even if it's implicit in the way the Olympics is, I think it really helps embolden those regimes, and that's a dangerous thing, which gives me a feeling of, we really should boycott. At the same time, when I think about particularly the Berlin Olympics, the message that Jesse Owens, in competing and winning his golds, how many win? 4 or 5 gold medals, that sends a much stronger message in a lot of ways, and a more long-lasting message than I think a boycott would, and undermines the claim of Aryan supremacy much better than us just not showing up and allowing the Olympics to go on, like they did in 1980, and the Russians just walk away with all the golds, and they didn't seem to be any less hurt by it. But I think Jesse Owens showing up and beating the Germans showed, and not just the Germans but Americans and others that black people are equal and ought not to be left out of things. And I think that helped Jackie Robinson, break the color barriers there in a way that I don't think the boycott would have. So I'm very torn on those things, because you know what I mean? I see that moral imperative of not giving a sanction to these kinds of regimes, but then I think sometimes having openly gay athletes go and compete in these Olympics and win, I think would be even a better message in some ways. What do you think of that?
That is true too. I was, especially when I was trying to make my predictions on the outcome of the men's hockey. Mm-hmm. I sure hope Russia actually doesn't meddle in any of that.
Right.
So Sweden, Canada, and the U.S., but Russia has a pretty strong team. So
they do, and they're going to have home field advantage. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, definitely don't want the Russians to particularly in ice hockey. I mean, they'll get their medals because Russia is a powerhouse in a lot of sports, but it would be great if they don't medal, and if it is some mix of Sweden, U.S., and Canada. And that, I mean, I could see Canada, the U.S., I don't know. I forget who'd you predict? You said Sweden, right?
Yeah, I think Sweden, Canada, Russia,
okay.
U.S.
Now, Lundqvist is a Swedish goalie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he's having a good year, right?
The last few games he's been kind of tentative.
Okay.
So, but actually last year I thought that they were going to do very well, but they lost out here at the end. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be great if they didn't medal, and if you had the other teams medal, and kind of, it'd be a nice sort of thumb in the nose, just like Jesse Owens was against Hitler. I think that sometimes can send a strong message.
And during the Cold War years, there was always a medal count,
mm-hmm.
right? The U.S. has this many gold, Russia has this many gold.
Right.
And so the Olympics were a way of sort of justifying our sense of national pride. And
well, it was a way for us to kind of battle it out in a way that didn't hurt anybody. If we could meet, and it would be nice if more international contests or international conflicts could be settled. Just let's go play a game of ice hockey and settle things. That would be a lot better than going to war. But I don't know how much sport really settled anything. But I think it does help play out some of these conflicts in ways that are maybe more healthy than actually going to war. I mean, I think that's an interesting research question. Uh, Probably more for sociologists than philosophers, but
Right.
How much of an effect does sport tend to increase and aggravate conflicts like that, to make things more tense between countries, like when the Iranians forfeit against Israelis in international competitions? Does that heighten the conflict, or is it a way of fighting the conflict in a more peaceful way that maybe helps diffuse it? And I don't know, and it may end up being, in some cases, it heightens it, in some cases, it decreases it. But it does seem like sport has an incredible power to change people's minds and to change the way they see other people, right? I mean, a lot of remembering of this with the passing of Mandela and the World Cup rugby and the World Cup soccer matches in South Africa, and Mandela's role in bringing that about and using that as a way to help unite post-apartheid South Africa. I think shows the positive power of how sport can bring people together. Jackie Robinson, again, another a figure I think who did more than a state or any laws or anything to help end and bring about the end of discrimination, or not the end, because obviously it's not over, but at least help bring about the end of legal discrimination in the U.S. When we start thinking about the question of politics and Olympics, right, we start talking about that a little bit, and you said that it's almost impossible to separate them, and then part of it is, well, how much do we really want to separate them? And if we really separate politics altogether, even if we could, if we did, would that take away some of the power of sport? Like, if we, what do you think about that? I mean, if we separate sports and politics too much, do we take away the power of sport to have that kind of effect on people's lives?
Yeah, I think that's a danger. Whenever we disengage, we lose authority and power to make a difference. I don't think they can, in principle, be divorced, but
right.
I don't think it would be a good thing if they were. Last year, I think I've seen on the United Nations webpage, there's this promotion to bring sport to the world, right? Declaring sport to be a human right. And I think that international organizations, not just national organizations, but international, can use sport as a tool to make positive social change in countries.
I definitely see that it has the power. I mean, as you probably expect, I don't like the phrasing "sport as a human right," but
right, I don't either.
But
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, and the UN as a protector of human rights is not doesn't have a good track record in my view. But the idea though of sport and as a way of bringing people together, as a way of breaking down barriers, I think is in some ways is a cliche, but I think it's a cliche because there's a lot of truth to it. But I think when you start thinking about the UN and other international organizations doing it in a top-down way, I think it does lose some of that power. That I think where the power comes from is when it is more, for lack of a better word, I guess, grassroots, where it comes out more organically, rather than kind of, if it's, or internally, I guess maybe is a better way to say it, that if it's perceived as coming from the outside, then it can be perceived as a kind of imperialistic thing or an imposition. But if it boils up from the inside and just the love of the sport, then I think its power is much greater. And I think when you see something like Jackie Robinson, for example, I think in a way, Branch Rickey sets out to break the color barrier. That's part of his goal. But part of his goal, and the major part of his goal, I think, is also to win. And he saw the advantage of bringing in a whole pool of talent that it was previously untapped, and being the first one to tap it would give him a distinctive advantage. So I think his motives there were twofold. and because it's a baseball motive, I think gives his move a lot more power. And then because Jackie was as good as he was, I think that also gives it that much more power. Similarly with now, have you seen the 16th Man, the Invictus movie?
I've seen Invictus
Okay.
but I didn't see the 16th Man version.
Yeah, I'm flipped. I haven't seen the movie, but I saw the documentary, the 30 for 30 documentary. I highly recommend it, both to my listeners or listener, I don't know, and to you. And I showed in my sports ethics class every year, and it's always a powerful movie. And Invictus is the more fictionalized Hollywood version of it, but still largely based, as far as I understand, on reality. And again, that's Mandela in some ways coming down from the top, but using the internal love of rugby on all sides in South Africa to try to unite people together. And I think that works better when it's coming from a place of love of the sport as well, and not as something that's artificial, because people see that, particularly if you're dealing with youth, they'll see that. And so it's got to come, I think, from the sport itself, which is a limitation on it, but I think also makes it more powerful. And we see that Israeli and Palestinians there's all sorts of little programs to try to bring them together to play soccer together. I don't know much about in Ireland if there's been a lot of use of sport to bring together Catholics and Protestants. Do you know anything about that?
No, not really.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. Look into that.
Yeah, and in other parts
they're usually drinking contests.
well, those work too. So, that's those can work too. Although if it's a drinking contest, that can sometimes end badly. But I guess so can soccer matches. But
throwing darts in the pub.
Yeah, well, that can end badly too. It's like give them weapons. Maybe that's what's good about soccer. You can't use your hands, so there's no weapons there.
So let me plug another one.
Yeah.
The two Escobars.
Oh yeah.
30 by 30.
Mm-hmm.
That's a story about Colombia's advance to the World Cup and a drug underlord.
Right.
And soccer was a way for Colombia to change how the world seen Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a pretty powerful. It's mostly in Spanish, but there is subtitles. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen that whole film, but I've seen enough chunks of it. It's powerful, and yeah, and it does shed light on what was going on in Colombia, and that's the one where the guy where they had the guy killed, right?
Right.
Yeah, because he scored it on himself against the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sport does open up. I mean, it's why I think it's one of the reasons why I at least am so interested in the philosophy of sport, is because sport, in both its highs and lows, I think it mirrors humanity. Obviously, it's a part of humanity, and I think it's a way for us to look at what it is to be human and how we interact. Both for good and for worse, and I think sport brings out the best and the worst in us, right? So the two Escobars and the killing of somebody because they didn't perform well, and I think didn't that happen in Iraq too? Didn't Saddam execute the soccer team because they didn't perform?
That's true.
Yeah, so that's obviously the dark side, but then you have the light side, or the bright side, and the where sport opens things up and really shows the greatness in human nature. Where, some of the examples we've already talked about, Jesse Owens, Jackie Robinson, what Nelson Mandela did in South Africa. But then, you have the Munich Olympics as well. So, I mean, it's something that is a window into our souls and into what it is to be human. And I think that's what makes sport so powerful, because it is universal too. I mean, there's, it's not something that only the West does. It's something that really every culture, as far as I can tell, has something like sport that is a big part of their culture, and maybe not as much as it is in the U.S. I mean, we do seem to consume sport like nobody's business, but or everybody's business, but it's but it's still part of every culture that I've come across and studied, at least touched on a little bit. And so I think it gives an access to something universal about human nature and how we interact and how we can strive to interact better and how we can be great together as well.
Yeah, that reminded me of the Boston Marathon bombing and how the Yankees came and sort of made peace with the Red Sox and sent their love, and so there is sort of a camaraderie in sport that surpasses the rivalries.
Absolutely. I mean, the rivalries are there, and they can get heated for sure. Sometimes they can go too far, but yeah, I mean the outpouring of affection for Boston and Boston sports after the marathon bombings was, as someone from Boston, was really. I'm trying to think of a non-cliched way to say it, but it was touching, and the Chicago Tribune had, basically we're all Bostonians now, and they had the Chicago Bruins, the Chicago Red Sox, right, in their thing, and it was pretty cool, and all the different stadiums, the parks around the league that sang "Sweet Caroline" during the seventh inning stretch as an homage to Fenway, and all those things were amazing, and people holding up signs for Boston Strong, and just all throughout the league, I thought was like you said. I mean, it really shows that the camaraderie, the underlying cooperation of engaging in sport is always deeper than the rivalry, than in a way the competitive element. The competition itself in sport is founded on cooperation, and that they're not in opposition to each other, but are part of each other. And I think that kind of episode brings that out.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. All right, we got a couple minutes here. So you mentioned that your prediction for the ice hockey was Sweden, Canada, and then Russia, and then U.S. In the fourth place. Is that?
I think that's what I said.
Yeah. That sounds right to me. I think Canada certainly has a chance at repeating, but those seem to be the names that stand out. They have the most NHL players and the most seem like they have the most talent. So, but like hockey, like the Stanley Cup, right? You get a hot goalie and you can ride that through tournament, and so there's likely to be a surprise somewhere in there. I don't know who.
I know.
Don't know who it will be, but there'll be a surprise. And so okay, we're both hockey fans, as well as obviously. But so Stanley Cup, it's still pretty early in the game to make any hard predictions on that. But you emailed me your prediction, and I really liked it. So I'll ask you to share that as well.
Okay, so let's see. I'm not at the computer, so I didn't recall. I think I had a repeat of the Chicago Blackhawks and the Boston Bruins, with the Bruins taking it this time.
Yes, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I think that's very realistic, and just the way you look at the way things are right now, that seems to be a pretty good bet. My concern about the Bruins is the health. They they've lost a few guys. They got some but they got some really good young guys, young defensemen that are playing for them. So if those guys continue to develop and rest, like we were just saying, so much comes down to the goalie, and so both the Blackhawks and the Bruins have great goalies. So that would be really a lot of fun. I'd love to see that. They're actually playing here in a couple weeks. Chicago Bruins are coming out to play in Chicago, but tickets are insanely expensive. They're talking $500-$600 tickets.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
Wow.
You can get standing room only for a couple $100, I think, or like $100 on StubHub. So that's a little rich for my blood for standing room, even for standing room only. So
Right.
if those are good seats, maybe I think about it. But $500-$600, I don't think so.
That's amazing.
I was shocked. I know this is StubHub, so I don't know. We'll see. Those prices may come down as you get closer to game time, so I'll keep an eye on that because that would be fun. Go and wear a Bruins jersey and get my butt kicked. I'll have to bring my son, who's 4.5, so no one will mess with me if I'm carrying around my son. They'll just be like, make. And Chicago fans aren't that bad. It's not like I'm going to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And
Always a tough city.
so yeah. Now NFL. So I know your Lions kind of fell apart here, but they got rid of their coach, which I think is a good move. And I think they'll be well positioned next year because they got a lot of talent. But who do you think is going to end up in the Super Bowl?
Well, I think that the NFC this season is pretty pathetic. But for the NFC playoffs, I have the Panthers and the Seahawks. And then for the AFC, I have the Broncos and the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the Broncos will end up in the Super Bowl with the Seahawks.
Yeah, I don't like that pick as much.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we have another, it was New England and Indianapolis Colts for a long time, but
Yep.
then Manning moved,
Yeah.
And he's hard to stop. He is hard to stop.
He is. He definitely is. But
But
they don't have a
Brady's a great
defense.
quarterback, too. So.
And Denver doesn't really have a defense to speak of right now. So if they do end up both getting to the championship, that's going to be one high-scoring game, and a scary game for me, definitely.
Well, that was like the Tigers and the Red Sox this summer.
Yeah.
For fall. But the AFC playoffs will be the game to watch, not the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I do think the AFC will win the Super Bowl, whether it's the Patriots or the Broncos, possibly even the Colts, maybe. No, I don't. It's hard to imagine either the Colts or the Chargers, but just because of I think the weather conditions are going to be a big factor. Because whether it's Carolina, New Orleans, even Seattle, San Francisco, even although they did pretty well in the weather conditions in Green Bay, but that was against Green Bay, which is a shell of itself. But I think playing the Meadowlands in February is going to be tough for an indoor Southern team. So I think that's going to give an advantage to the AFC teams, which are outdoor Northern city teams. So, yep. All right. Well, we're out of time. Thanks for joining me today, Craig.
All right. It was fun.
This has been the Sports Ethicist Show. You can find us at sportsethicist.com, Facebook, and Twitter, and you can email the show at sportsethicist@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.